Viviana Zambrano is a two-time Seton Hall alumna who has dedicated her career to serving college students. She is a champion for student success and retention with in-depth experience in understanding and responding to the needs of first-generation students, those who generally represent the first generation in their households to pursue higher education. Viviana shares with us her why, her source of inspiration, and how it connects back to her journey to and through Seton Hall. So take a listen. Viv, welcome to the show. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you on and to get into your story and to interview you today. Thank you for joining.
I'm so excited to be here with you.
It's particularly special for me because you were one of the pivotal, critical, most influential people that were part of my Seton Hall experience. And so it's truly like an honor and a pleasure to sit in this format with you and talk to you on the show and share your story with the Seton Hall community. So I want to get into it. I want to start at the beginning. I want to know, how did you end up at Seton Hall? Thank the stars for putting you there and then putting me there. So tell me, how was the transition for you into Seton Hall and what brought you to the university to begin with?
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction and your kind words. Let's just wrap it up right there. There's nothing else that I'm going to say that's going to live up to what you just said. It really is an honor for me to be here talking to you about Seton Hall. Seton Hall is near and dear to both of us in different ways. And, I'll start by saying that Seton Hall for me just became a very clear option. I was very fortunate to be a part of the Upward Bound program, which is a federal TRIO program for students of limited income, first generation college students. And so one of the things that they ensured is that we weren't going to default into just a college because of proximity, because it was the only one that had been brought to our attention. They took us on college tours. We toured a lot of colleges in the Northeast, I would say 15 to 20 in the years that I was a part of the program. And one of those colleges in New Jersey, right, happened to be Seton Hall. And I had already gone to, Bowdoin College and Harvard and, all of these, UMass, right? They took us all over the place. And then we got to Seton Hall, right, home, but far enough away, right? I grew up in Union City in Hudson County. And so it seemed like a different world because Seton Hall is very idyllic, right? It's a gated community. It's very pretty. It always has been. And so I felt connected immediately to the campus. It's something that, when I talk to students, I currently work in higher education. I ask them about, what was it about this school? And sometimes we can put words to that and sometimes we can't. And for me, I couldn't really put words to it. I don't know that I still can, but I was very grateful that Upward Bound introduced me, right, to just the college pathway. Because as a first gen student, my parents couldn't necessarily offer me that support. It was kind of like, you got to go to school, but like, we don't know where the map is. You got to figure it out. And so Upward Bound was really critical in introducing me to that process. And then as a result, EOP, which I'll talk about later, because that became, another very important part of my life. But Seton Hall really just felt like it wasn't too small. It wasn't too big. It felt just right. And there was a sense of peace that I had in walking through the campus and then going back for a college interview through the EOP program that I just said, this is the place that I'm supposed to be.
I can identify with the part that you're saying about sometimes you can put words to it and sometimes you can't, because I don't know that I can really put words to why I decided to go to Seton Hall. I mean, there's so many different explanations for it, but I do know that there was a moment in time where I recognized this was where I was supposed to be, or this is where I needed to be. Was there a moment in time for you where, beyond that first visit, where you were like, oh, this feels right, once you were integrated into the Seton Hall community, was there a transformative experience or a moment that said, like, I feel affirmed in my decision?
Yeah, and it may not be what, would come up typically for most people. So My class was a class that experienced the Seton Hall fire. That was my freshman year. I lived in Boland Hall. Frank, Aaron, and John were my classmates. John was actually a good friend of mine that I'd met through the EOP program. We had gone through the 6 week summer program together. And so that experience, although tragic in many ways and transformative, for me was also a moment where I said, I want to continue to be here, right? And I remember many people, including my Upward Bound counselor, saying, do you want to stop out? Do you want to take the semester off? You don't have to continue right now. Like, you just experienced something really traumatizing. But what I got from the community at that time, and specifically the EOP staff, was a lot of warmth, right? They kind of just wrapped their arms around us. There was a lot of checking in with us. Our professors were aware and very conscious that, we had had this experience, right, living in the residence hall. And what I realized at that time, right, and I didn't connect it in that moment, was that a lot of the things that the staff were doing were not a part of their job, right? It was
Mm,
more that they cared. And this extended beyond, the job description and the bullet points, but that they really were invested in ensuring that we had a positive experience, that if we needed counseling, right, whether it was in that moment or a little further down the road, because counseling isn't something that all of us grew up, understanding the need for it,
right,
right? Or a
right,
support group, right? Or just a check-in, right? Just like how are things going, not in relation to what happened, but just in general, because we all had different things going on. And so for me, that was when I understood that this community, right, really cared for me, and that I was going to stay and see it through, right? And we felt bonded, right? You bond in different ways, and we bonded in tragedy, but we wanted to ensure that, that didn't define our experience, and that we had other experiences, that we could smile about and that we could really take joy from. And like I said, there were so many people. Rosario Reyes, who was the assistant dean of students at the time, integral person who became a mentor to me. Just again, those check-ins, right? Not just how are you that we do in passing a lot of times, just to, make conversation, but really how are you, and looking deep in your eyes, and waiting for a response, and challenging you to not just say good, right, but to really say, well, let me let me think about that, because
yeah,
you can tell that they're asking, and it's not a prescriptive thing. They actually
yeah,
want to know. And so
yeah.
that for me was a time period, like I said, difficult, right, but that really was a turning point for me in understanding that this was my community.
Everything you just said makes me feel so many different things because I hear you when you say some of what folks were doing were not necessarily part of their job, right? And this sounds like such a people centered approach. You as a person, you as a human first. And I feel these different types of ways because that also was what my takeaway from Seton Hall was, right? And I mentioned at the start of the call, and I'm probably going to keep mentioning it throughout this interview. You were one of those people for me that also did that. And while I didn't have that same experience as your class did with the tragic fire, we're all going through our own experiences. And so when I first got to Seton Hall, I was feeling a little out of place. Jersey City to South Orange, close enough, but also like another world. And to have folks that embrace you, that see you for you, and challenge you to see you as well for yourself is really such a pivotal experience. And so I'm kind of bringing us to the point in which we are no longer looking at Viviana as the student, but now what I'm referring to is that when I was a student, you were one of the administrators. So you continue to be part of the Seton Hall experience and the Seton Hall community post graduation. Why did you choose to do that?
So what I didn't realize that the faculty and staff were doing, right, was training me. So, and when I say that is, I had so many different jobs at Seton Hall. I mean, I worked in the sociology department, the honors department. I was a part of the honors program. Then I was a peer leader, a tutor counselor. I had all these different roles. And I was being trained really for a career in higher education without really knowing it. I was a psychology major, and I never really wanted to do therapy, but I always knew that I wanted to work with adolescents. And then that transformed into specifically working with students. And I said, well, can I do what they're doing? Can I be a counselor? Can I be an advisor? And so, that transition was almost seamless, I would say, right? But I didn't know that I was being prepared for that. And I think that is the experience of a lot of first gen students, where it's kind of like you got to pick a major, you got to know what your career is going to be. And a lot of us don't, let's be honest, because there's a lot of exploration that should happen in college. And so for me, upon graduation, everyone just assumed, like, yeah, she knows what she's doing. She's a good student. She's a good student leader. Like, she's obviously either has a job already or she is enrolled in a master's program somewhere. There was even a rumor that I had gotten accepted into some master's program,
Yeah.
but I really hadn't, right? I had no plan. Like, I didn't, for the first time in my life, I was like, I don't know what's next. And so I had already agreed to work for the EOP summer program as a head residential counselor, welcoming the incoming freshmen through the 6-week summer program. And then it was like, well, that's it. And then they posted a job for a student development specialist in the EOP program. And the requirement was that you had to have a bachelor's in one of the related areas, some experience working with students, and either be enrolled in a master's program or
Have
intending to
one.
enroll, right?
Okay, okay.
And so that was it. I applied. I took non-matriculated courses because I hadn't enrolled at the time, and that's how the pathway started, right? And that break really from graduation to starting full time was May to September. Yeah.
That is crazy.
Hmm.
And I feel like you didn't just kind of take a job, right? Like, from what I know of your professional career experience, you have really built a career of deeply investing in the student experience. And that is so particular. It is so in alignment with what you said earlier about the folks doing the same for you. It's I can see the legacy of that through you. And so I want to know why that's important to you. Like, what is it that drives you to create a professional life that says, I got a degree and I want to have a good job, but I don't just want to have a job. And I really want to do something that is going to create impact in the lives of students. And it's so particular. What
I love
motivates
this
you?
question. I love this question, right? So I'm an immigrant to this country, right? I was born in Ecuador. My parents, don't speak the language. As I mentioned earlier, education was always something that they pushed, but couldn't necessarily support me in that process.
Mm,
And I mentioned that because my parents always worked, right? My mother would always say, trabajo es trabajo, right? So if you have work is work, and if it's available, you take it, right? And so it was always this humble approach to, we have to work, right? You work to live.
yeah.
And they did that, right? And they provided. I didn't know that we, were poor. I didn't know that we didn't have enough, because I always felt like I had enough. And I thank them, right, for that, because my experience was that if I needed something, I had it, right? We didn't have
Mm,
luxury, but I had enough as far as I was concerned.
right.
And I mentioned that because my parents had all kinds of jobs and at times were unemployed, but none of the jobs that they had were ever based on them wanting to do that work or taking pride in that work, or wanting to go to work and being like, I can't wait to get to work today, or I'm excited about this, right? They work to provide, right? They work to ensure that we had food and clothing and shelter, but not necessarily because they felt purposeful, in the job itself. They felt purposeful in providing,
Mm,
right, and giving us, my sister and I, a different experience. And so the gift that they gave me, and I say this all the time, is the ability to propel on purpose, right? The ability to choose something that brings me joy, that I am doing, that's, yes, it's going to pay me, but in addition to that, that really fulfills me. And I think that is, the connection in terms of having that first gen experience of, I get to choose something, as opposed to I'm doing this just because. And I mention that because I love what I do. It's a blessing that I get to do this every day. And that was my only goal in college as an undergrad, was to not be one of those people that woke up every day and hated going to work, right? I
Right.
didn't know what I was going to do. I was like, I just don't want to be a person that hates my job,
Right.
right? And again, I will continue to give credit to the people in my life that were mentoring me. And by the way, I'm using the word mentoring, but I didn't understand that that's what they were doing. That just wasn't something that we named in a way. But I'll give you the example. My college counselor in Upward Bound, Veronica Jackson, she drove me to every college interview, including Seton Hall, on the weekends, right during the week, because my parents worked so often that they really couldn't pull themselves away, and at times didn't have a car really to take
Mm,
me to these places. And again, that's one of those things that was outside of her job responsibilities. And so when you speak to that student-centered approach and the student experience, I learned from the best, right? I learned from people that were really invested in me and understood that, if I just tell you, take these classes, get involved and do these things, but don't ask deeper questions and try to understand, that maybe you struggle asking for help, right?
right.
That maybe you've been doing this your whole life by yourself. And so, now everyone's like, you're like, I don't need help. I'm okay. I've been
Right.
doing it on my own, right? So getting to the bottom of those things was really important, and delving into, again, not just, you ask me what motivates me, but what motivates that student? Why did they arrive here? Whether at Seton Hall or another college campus, like, are you here by default? Are you here for yourself? Are you here because you were told that there was no other choice? And then you can really start analyzing that sense of belonging, right? Because then okay, this is your starting point, and this is what's either going to keep you motivated and on track or will detract you from that.
So we've been talking a little bit about your career and what motivates you. And so let's take a step back and uh, let the people know, what do you do right now? What is your current position? Where are you at? What is the work that you are involved in?
So I currently work at Kane University, and I serve as the director for student retention and educational innovation, which is a really long title for. We identify barriers, right, for student enrollment and persistence, and analyze policies. We work with first generation college students, analyzing against that sense of belonging, right, ensuring that we're talking not just to the students, but also to their families, because when a first gen student goes to college, the whole family's coming with them, right? There's an education for everybody with that process. And so, it's a little bit of everything, I would say, but it's really connecting the dots for students in terms of what services are available to them that will assist them in persisting on the road to graduation.
And so I really wanted to hear from you, right? That explanation of the work that you do, because you mentioned that first generation experience coming from parents who did not go to college, who are not as familiar with the ins and outs of what it means to go touring colleges, of what it means to interview, of what it means to fill out applications, of what it means to look at the financials of tuition and getting enrolled. And so there's there's oftentimes in higher ed a very simplistic narrative around the choice to go to college and the choice to make it through college. And what I admire about the work that you're doing is that it takes a broader look at the circumstances of students, and in particular of first generation students. And why is it so important to understand that first generation students are coming from a different level of knowledge and exposure when going into college? Like, why do we have to think about the particular circumstances and address it? Why should we not be having this simplistic view?
Because then we're just making assumptions, right? I think that I just mentioned this yesterday. We had a first gen panel with freshmen, high school freshmen, and we talked a little bit about the terminology, right? Some of our panelists were using certain terminology, and I just stopped at one moment and I said, "Does everyone in the room know what that means?" Right? And the students were like, "No, we don't know what that means." And so that's part of it, right?
Yeah.
It's just, there's a language, right, that we speak on a college campus in higher education that you don't know until you get there. People don't know what the registrar and the burse are and the promissory note and all of these things are, generally speaking, right? Especially first gen students. And so it's really, I know we say it often, but meeting the student where they are and not assuming things, right? So it's not that you should know, because how would you know, right? So it's examining, are we doing a good enough job of making the language accessible, right? And ensuring that we're covering basics before we get into more complicated territory. And I think that that's really important, because otherwise you're losing the person, right? Because if I'm talking at a level, I'll give you an example. My very first class at Seton Hall, in the honors program, we had like 16 books as was a part of the curriculum for this colloquium. And the first book that we had to read was the Iliad. And we had to have it read before the first day of class, right? And I read it. I can't say I understood it, but I read it. So I, get to class, I'm ready to discuss this book. And one of the professors, because it was taught by multiple professors, asked, how many of you read this book in high school? And about 95% of the class raises their hands. So it was like three of us looking at each other like, oh, just us. And so the professor says, okay, great. Then we're just going to review a few things from that book. And I was devastated. And I mention that because what I tell students all the time, and I wish I'd known at that time, right, is that what is review for someone else, you are learning for the first time. And
Right.
that's okay, right?
Mm.
That's totally okay. But there is that doubt, right? There is that, why don't I know these things? And so
Yeah.
that's the conversation that I have with students before they even express the doubt, because sometimes they won't, is it's okay for you not to know. And I often say to them, have you done this before? And they look at me like I'm being silly. Um, and they go, no. And I go, exactly. You've never been in college before. So how would you know, right? How would you know any of these things, right? This is your first introduction to it. And I think that part of it is that we forget what it's like to be new at something, right? Like if you think about driving, right? At one point, we, may have been hitting the curb or not knowing how to parallel park, or, just turning the corner was a really big thing. And now
Right.
we just get in the car and we drive. We don't think about it, right? And so that's what I think of when it comes to students, especially our incoming freshmen, is that they don't know these things. And after a while, a lot of these things are going to become second nature to them, but everything is foreign when they get there, right? And so to us, we're doing it on a daily basis. So we may take that for granted, but it's really stopping and saying, how do I ensure that they're with me and I'm not 5 steps ahead and I've left them behind, right? And again, I mentioned the family as well, because it's also explaining, right, to families that the college experience isn't just in the classroom, right? As we know, leadership roles, internships, right? Student organizations are really important to your college experience. You were in Adelante. I was in Adelante as a student, and then I was the advisor. I joined a sorority. Which by the way, my parents thought I joined the cult. So like explaining those things is really important. I'm very serious. My mother still tells people that I joined a cult when I was in college, but that I got out because nothing bad happened to me. She'll tell anyone who will listen, and I'm like, lady, you're making things up.
That is
But that's
fantastic.
because there's no word for sorority in Spanish, right?
Yeah.
The closest word to sorority in Spanish is hermandad, which sounds a little religious. And so in her mind, that's what it was. And so, these are things like I laugh about it, but it actually helps me a lot in my conversations with students, and with their families in helping them understand why, doing a study abroad experience, or
Right.
just to travel, learn to do service, right, to another
Right.
state or another country is really a part of that college experience. So I laugh about it, but I do draw from those experiences because not much has changed when it comes to the perspective of, what you do as a college student, right? Which the
Mm.
goal is to graduate, but learning happens in so many other spaces. And we
Yeah.
have to really, showcase that in different ways, but it's okay to stop and explain those things.
It is so great that you mentioned things like bursar and promissory, because as soon as you said those words, I memories were flashing through my head. Like literally, as soon as you said bursar, as soon as you said promissory, those were things that I didn't know. And at the time, I'm a first gen student as well. And at the time, I felt like an imposter, completely out of place. up completely behind the ball. And I was such a good student in high school. I went to a private high school, it was a college prep school, and still I was completely under prepped for what the actual experience was going to be. And there was not many people within like my household that could walk me through that. They also didn't know what bursar or promissory or any of these things meant. And if anything, it was, something that I was supposed to know because I'm the one that's going to college. So when you say that, it immediately brings back memories, and it is something that's so important to talk about. And not only for the students' college experience, I think that part of what, when we're talking about higher education, we tend to forget is that this experience is a transformative experience. It's a shaping experience that then dictates or influences how this person moves on into their careers and into society. And I think that's such an important note that is coming up for me when you are explaining, the small details that a lot of folks are not necessarily thinking about. It takes me to ask, one of the things you said was not much has changed around what the perception of college is. You go to college, you're meant to graduate, and those intricacies are not at the forefront. And so when I was working at Seton Hall, up until 2021, there were a lot of programs being created or a lot of energy being put towards first generation programs during those years. And it seemed almost like like a spike in attention to first generation programs. And I want to know from your perspective, do you feel like in recent years we've started to put more attention to this experience? And if so, do you foresee a moment where people are like, okay, we did that, we're done now, and move on?
Yeah, that's accurate. So a lot of people that I talk to will say, wait, am I first gen? Like, was I first gen when I was in college? And I'm like, yeah, we just weren't necessarily talking about those things as you mentioned. I only knew the term because I was in an Upward Bound program. And so they were very adamant about what it meant, right? But outside of that, I never really heard it. And so what has happened in the last couple of years, and I would say 15 years about, is that the narrative has changed around first generation college students. We weren't talking about it as much years ago, but when we did talk about it, right, and when I say we, I mean higher education as a whole,
Mm-hmm.
it was really from a point of deficit. It was 89% of these students don't make it, right? And so
Mm,
it was like, these are all the pressures that they face. And, really, again, deficit, right? Nobody really wants to hear that or be labeled in that way. And so what has happened in the last couple of years, as I mentioned, is that we're kind of turning that on its head and looking at it as a point of pride, right? You being first, yes, there's a lot of pressure that comes with it. There's a lot of work to be done to increase graduation rates for first generation college students, but also, what are the characteristics of this particular group? They're gritty, right? They can figure it out. They will problem solve. They've already figured a lot of stuff out before.
mm-hmm.
Now
Mm-hmm.
they just need the help and assistance to get through, right, to whatever their goal is. And so that narrative has certainly changed. I don't see it going in the check, we did this kind of thing. Maybe the focus will be greater for another population at some point. But what I see is that the number is growing of people that are identifying in this way, right? So every day I have conversations with students that say, I think I'm first gen, but I'm not sure. So ensuring that they understand, every university defines it differently. There is no one universal definition of what it means to be first gen, but just engaging in those conversations, because families are not the nuclear family of yesteryear. They're very
Yeah.
different. Everybody's circumstances are different, and so there's a lot of nuance when it comes to that identity. But I don't think that it will go away. I think that if anything, we're just kind of like opening up to all of the intricacies of this identity. More and more we see students showing up and identifying in more applications, scholarships, different things. And it's just to have a better understanding. The FAFSA used to ask more pointedly this question. They've changed the questions a little bit regarding that, but I don't think that that will go away. And the other thing is that, we're talking about first gen in terms of college. But when you're a first gen college student and then you become a first gen graduate,
Mm,
you never stop being first. You know, never, right? If you go to graduate school, well, guess what? Now you're the first in your family
yeah.
to go for a graduate or professional degree, right? And what does that look like? Because now it's a whole different experience. It's not the same as undergrad. And then you may be the first, as I mentioned, to choose a career that you love, right? To negotiate a salary. Right. I
Right.
remember telling my mom that like I negotiated a salary once upon a time and she was looking at me like I was crazy. She's like, what do you
Yeah.
mean? They offered you money and you said no? And what if they had said no? And I said, well, that's what a negotiation is, but with the understanding that that's not something that she'd ever really had the opportunity to do, right? And so
Yeah.
there's all these little intricacies, right? Whether it's like buying a home, like there's so many things that come with the territory, so it never ends, right? And I don't mean that in a negative way. I think that it's always like another layer of exploration of okay, what does this look like, right? But also understanding that there's community, right,
Mm,
around you, that
hmm.
you're not alone in that experience, and that talking about it will probably lead you to other people that are saying, oh my goodness, you too,
Yeah.
right? When I
Right.
think about, becoming a professional, right, a young professional at Seton Hall, like if I didn't have, Manny Mercedes, Dr. Mercedes now, right, to ask questions of, if I couldn't lean on, Maggie Alarcon, who worked in talent search, and she said to me, hey, listen to me. She was like, they're going to offer you this for your 401k. And I was like, what's a 401k? And she walked me through the paperwork, right? And she
Yeah.
said, well, this is what it means. She's like, you're not thinking about your retirement or a retirement plan, but this is what this means. My
Mm-hmm.
parents don't have a retirement plan. That's not
Mm-hmm.
something that that they again were able to really establish based on their trajectory. So these were all things that were new to me, and thankfully, like I said, I had community around me that I was open to as well, right? To really be vulnerable with them and say, I don't
Right.
really know what any of this means,
Right.
and that's okay.
Right. Right. That is so important. And that, I mean, when you just said that, right, the first gen experience goes beyond graduation. It was like my mind just that emoji where it like your brain explodes. Like, wow, that is so true. And it expands. And when we're talking about intricacies, it expands beyond the college campus of all these first of college campus of all this learning. It goes into the professional world, the corporate world, whether it's nonprofit or advocacy or government. Like, these are all now new worlds that you have to navigate without really any introductory point. And for folks that went to college for the first time in their family, that introductory point is even more detailed in the sense of the learning curve. So that was such an important note to make. And I think that it makes me think about community, as you mentioned. It makes me think about how important it is to build that circle of people that you can trust and be vulnerable with. Because when I think about what it is like to have all these firsts for students and for folks entering, young professionals, for folks entering the working world, there is a vulnerability that you have to have or that comes up when you realize you don't know, when you feel like an outsider, or you feel like you're supposed to know something. That's a vulnerable position to be in. So to be able to express that vulnerability with people is to have a sense of community. I say that because while you were a student at Seton Hall and then became a administrator at Seton Hall, once you moved on to work at another university, you continue to be engaged with Seton Hall. So it speaks to the theme of community. Why has that been important to you? And it's not just Seton Hall that you've continued to be engaged with. You also volunteer for a number of other organizations and spaces. Why?
So one of the staff members in the EOP office would always say, to whom much is given, much is required. And that really has always stuck with me, right? And Seton Hall, servant leadership, right? That's a huge part of it. We did service in our, freshman seminar courses, and it's just a part of the fabric of the experience. Like I didn't even think about it twice, right? To me, it's you're supposed to serve in some capacity because we all have something that we can give, whether it's our time, mentorship, donations, like whatever it may be. And to me, Seton Hall's home. I think of students like you, like Claudia Guevara. I officiated her wedding, a few years ago. I'm so connected to so many people, right? That are, some are still there and some are not. And so I love going back and talking to students, whether it's through Adelante or other programs, because it gives me an opportunity, A, to just revisit the campus. Sometimes it's virtual, right? So sometimes we're doing Zoom things, but that's okay. But I really like going to campus because I have so many amazing experiences there, right? I think I just got so much out of it, both as a student, in undergrad, in my master's program, as, a professional at Seton Hall, and as an alum. Like, I think that experience, I just moved somewhere. I moved somewhere new. And in the parking lot, I saw this gentleman and he had a pirate magnet, and I was like, should I say something? Is he going to think it's odd? Right. And I was like, you know what? Let me just go over to him. And I'm like, hey. And he's like, hi. Right. He's looking at me like, why are you pushing me? Right. Stranger danger. But I said, I saw the pirate on your car. I was like, I went to Seton Hall. So we just talked for like 20 minutes in the parking lot about his experience at Seton Hall and my experience at Seton Hall. So again, it's just, we're everywhere, right? Seton Hall alumni are everywhere. So to me, in talking to him, I told him about my involvement with different aspects of the community. And he's like, oh, I would love to be involved. He's like, oh, I would love to, mentor a student. And I was like, oh, I can put you in contact with someone, right? So it's always that, piece of like, it's not just my experience, but how do I connect someone else? Because I think that, again, there's always something you can give back and some way
Hmm.
to give back. And why not? Right? Why not? There are students there who need to talk to someone like you or like me, and
Hmm.
they may see, oh, Viannca, you're doing this great job that you love. Viviana, you're in a career that gives you purpose. It's like, yeah, but guess what? I was you, right? In
Yeah.
many aspects, right? But a lot of times students don't see that. And so I think it's really important to talk about those things because they see, oh, you have all these degrees or you have these titles and you do all these things. It's like, yeah, but I started out in this same classroom that you're sitting in and you're thinking, am I going to do well in this class? I was there too, right? And
Hmm.
so engaging in those conversations to me is extremely important. And I do it in my everyday work, but being able to do it at home, right? And Seton Hall is home. Is extremely important to me, and I'll continue to do so. I'm actually moved closer, so I live a lot closer to Seton Hall, which I hope will mean that I can be there, for more late night events in the future.
I love that. I love that. I love that you mentioned servant leadership, that sense of community, the pirate magnet. I mean, like sometimes I'm on the highway and I'm like, me too. Me too. Right? Like it's the running joke of my partner Hamlet is like, do you want me to try to get him to pull over? Like he has a pirate magnet. And absolutely, yes. Viviana, which I'm not used to calling you. So, Viv, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you so much for sharing your Seton Hall journey and your story and just all these insights that really make us think about how complex and how deep and how meaningful a student experience can be, and those of us that are involved in the community, whether as alumni, volunteers, as administrators, as mentors, friends, as parents who have children going to college, how we can be so much more mindful of these experiences. So thank you so much for bringing that to the show today.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be in conversation with you. I think the world of you. I will say this one more time. I take such great pride in being a part of a student's journey, right? I do not take that for granted. And wherever that journey takes them. And so me knowing, having conversations with you in my office at Seton Hall and seeing where you are now and remembering the things that you wanted for yourself at that time, right? Those things to me are so beautiful that I get to say, oh, I remember when, right? This was just the thought, right? A very, very far away thought, but here you are, doing things in your life that give you purpose. And I'm just so grateful for the opportunity, like I said, to engage with you today and to talk about work that I love to do.
I'm grateful to you, not only for being on the show, but I'm grateful to you for being one of those people that really, really did give me a transformative experience that opened my mind and then helped me see things and helped me navigate not only the college world, but a lot of the world after that. And when I think back on my Seton Hall experience, and I came out with a good chunk of debt. And when I think, damn, would I do that again? I would, because I cannot imagine not being in the community and not having the folks that I had to guide me. And you were absolutely one of those key figures. So I am eternally grateful to you.
Thank you.
Before we wrap, is there any last piece of wisdom, any last insight, any last words of advice you want to give the Seton Hall community?
Just that, there are a lot of students, as I mentioned before, who are willing to really connect, right, with alumni. I have a mentee through the CHAMP program, and she's amazing. She probably doesn't need me, but it really, I just enjoy talking to her so often, right? And just talking to her about her dreams and her hopes and her experiences and all the things that she's involved with. And I love that she explains things to me that I already know about, right? But I kind of hold back. And she's like, well, this is what the MLK scholars are. And I'm like, right? And in my head, I'm like, oh, I know all about the MLK scholars. And so I say that because I think that, if I would encourage anyone who is considering, giving back in some way, to start by connecting with students, and asking them about what their hopes and their dreams are, and what their goals are, even if it's not aligned to your particular career, because to me it just reawakens something in you, right? It makes you think, like, I remember having these doubts, I remember not knowing what my next steps were. And I think that that's really important. And I'll go back to what I said before: to whom much is given, much is required. So if you feel like you have gained a lot in your life from people, and people have poured into you, pour a little back out.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Viviana is one of more than 100,000 alumni who demonstrate what great minds can do with a Seton Hall education.